Okay. Item 4.6, update on student enrollment and transfer trends.
Okay, good afternoon, members of the board and Madam Chair. This was originally scheduled to be two parts, enrollment and transfer. Given the time, I'm going to work with you here and actually do enrollment, and then let's work on rescheduling the transfer piece for a little bit later, if I could. Just because I originally had this scheduled for a little bit longer, but I want to get you the pertinent enrollment piece first.
Well,
Okay.
we normally meet until 5. Is that enough time for you?
Tell you what, let's go through the enrollment piece,
Okay.
and if it works,
Okay.
we've got time, and
Okay.
then I'd be glad to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And we've got a handout coming around. So what I'm going to present to you today are information on enrollments. They're through the end of fall 2009, which may on the surface seem a little bit stale, but knowing our data collection system, we collect data at the end of each primary term. So we're actually right now in the process of collecting spring and year-end data. So we don't have a full set of spring data in, but we do have summer '09 and fall '09, which I think we can learn quite a bit from. I'm going to talk about the enrollment in 3 sections here. I'm going to talk about students and student headcount. I'm going to talk about changes in courses that have occurred, what's being put on and those types of differences, and I'm going to talk about FTES, or full-time equivalent student, which is our workload metric. So starting off with the handout, starting off with total students, you look at the trend here looking down the column. So if you look at summer, 746, 763, 838, 903, and then suddenly in summer of 2009, this is total student head count for that primary term. It drops from 903,000 to 780,000. That marked the end of the expansion. Okay, the last and largest term we had in our system was spring of 2009 at that 1.813 million head count. And then the following fall, 2009, it went down to 1.792 million from the prior fall, which was 1.795 million. Not a great drop from fall to fall, but what I'm going to show you here is that even though that's basically the same head count, a lot of things changed, and the profile of our students changed, the profile of our courses, and FTES changed as well. Basically, this is because of rationing. We are currently in a process of rationing access to our system. Courses have been cut. FTES is actively trying to be cut. And so this is what happens when rationing occurs. This is what happened in the early 90s when we went through this. This is what happened in the 2000s. The patterns are actually very similar each time. The only thing that's different this time is that we do not have a fee increase to weigh in. So from a certain sense, this is a pure experiment. Fees have stayed the same, and now we get to see what happens when just the budget side is cut. Okay, turning to page 2. So here's the lineage of what the student population looks like, basically before and after, from the sense of race and ethnicity. One of the things underlying this here is fall 2009 represented the first term in which we started reporting race and ethnicity under the new federal standards for race and ethnicity, which allow for a student to check more than one race and ethnicity. So it essentially starts a new time series. And the most significant thing that occurred at this is on the bottom row there. We basically almost doubled the number of students who simply declined to state their race and ethnicity. And from what I understand, this is something that's occurring nationally from these new guidelines. We're doing it exactly as the way the feds have said to do it, and this is kind of the result. So we're now up to 18% of the students don't even bother giving us a race or ethnicity, which is problematic for measuring race and ethnicity. You'll see every other category on there is in decline, which, you know, that's a statistical, you know, oddity, just simply because we've started a new way of collecting it. So we can't really draw any conclusions as far as during this change, have things changed for our student race or ethnicity patterns? We don't know. Student gender, however, shows a slow and steady increase in the percentage of students that are male. And this is not something that changed drastically between fall '08 and fall '09. It's actually a slow trend if you look across the row there that is male, 43.1, 43.6, 43.9, 44.2, 44.5. slowly males are starting to return to college. We, at one point, were almost 60-40 female. Next page under student age. This is definitely something that has occurred through rationing. We showed a marked decrease in the percentage of students that are under the age of 17, which are primarily in our system special admits, K through 12 students who are accessing our system. And we lose students who are age 35 and older, which I will brutally refer to as older students. I know that hurts, but hurts me too.
Because you're 36?
Right. And as a result, we've got a greater percent of our population in the 18 to 24 and then the 25 to 34 range. Both of those two actually increased during this period of time. So we really lost age-wise students on either one of the tails, young students, old students. And I think as we look through some of the other data, we'll see why this is. Has to do with what's being put on, who has curricular priority in getting the courses. Under student self-declared goal, we did have a pretty sharp increase in the percentage of students who declare goals of being degree seeking, degree, certificate, transfer seeking. Somewhat this probably has to do with fewer special admits, fewer older students, fewer single course takers. The bulk of the degree seeking students are in the 18 to 24 range, and so if that increases, you're likely to get more students who have a degree goal. Next page, page 4. Under student enrollment status. So this is something that we have to pay attention to because it plays out later on. Enrollment priority in our system goes to students who already are in the system. They generally are able to get their classes first. Students who are first-time students, students who are what we call returning students, or students who were in our system, stopped out, and are now trying to get back in, have lower enrollment priority. And as a result, those two enrollment status dropped quite a bit. For the first-timers from 28% to 26%, and the returning students from 18.5% to 16.4%. And there were a lot more continuing students. So really, in times of rationing, when you're in, you have enrollment priority. It's the ones who are trying to get in that tend to struggle and not make it. Now, this is kind of dangerous because continuing students eventually leave, but if you don't have a lot more first-time students to replace them, you have a hard time keeping your FTES numbers up 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line. Robert Turnage once told me a bad analogy, but he says it's a much smaller rat moving through the snake. Okay? If for 3 or 4 years in a row you cut down on your first-time freshman classes, then 3 or 4 years later, when you're trying to grow again, you don't have enough continuing students to fill the seats. So that's why it takes us 4 or 5 years to get out of this cycle once we're in it. We lost a lot of K through 12 special admits as well. So continuing students are in. Just to give you, since I'm given percentages here, how many bodies are we talking about? In fall of 2008, there were 848,000 first-time transfer in and special admits. In fall of 2009, there were 735,000. So that's a loss of 112,000 students just from a fall to fall. When you add in winter and you add in spring, that's where you get a figure of, and we're going to lose 250,000 students who cannot access the system. That's how that plays out. Okay, so those are kind of the nuggets on head count. Moving to course sections offered. Underneath all this, there's a lot of enrollment management going on. In our system, unlike CSU and UC and K-12, about the only lever of enrollment management we have is playing with the course schedule, putting on more or less fewer courses. Summer '09 marked the first bad budget year. And colleges began reacting and cutting courses considerably. So we went from 56,000 courses in summer to 43,000 courses in summer system-wide. Same thing happened between fall '08 and fall '09. We went from 178,000 courses to 166,000 courses as colleges began to try and shrink to meet their caps and their FTES goals and not be over-capped. Enrollments here are the number of bodies in seats that those courses generate. Section size is basically the equivalent of class size. So in this case, take a look at fall '09. Even though we dropped 11,000 courses during that period of time, we actually generated more enrollments simply because class size went up from 29 to 31. In summer '09, when class size went to 30, that was the first time in the history of my data collection, which goes back to '92, that class size had ever reached 30. So, in a certain sense, it's full to the brim and very efficient. However, when you keep filling and filling, that doesn't necessarily reduce your FTES. And we'll see that in a minute. But over the course of summer '09 and fall '09, we cut almost 25,000 courses in this entire system to try and get us within FTES scope. So what kind of courses were cut? Page 6. So we went from fall to fall, we went from 178,000 to 167,000 courses. That's a drop of 6.4%. So using that as a baseline, if a certain type of course was cut more than 6.4%, you could say they were targeted. And if they were cut less than 6.4%, you could say they were spared. So this gets into curricular priority and how the campuses navigated, well, what kinds of things do we need to hold on to and what kinds of things should we get rid of? So the system cut credit sections by 5.8%, but cut non-credit sections by 12.8%. So we kept credit and targeted non-credit. We cut transferable sections 4.4 and non-transferable 10.7. We kept basic skills 4.3, non-basic skills at 6.6. Voc Ed sections went down at a greater rate than non-Voc Ed sections, and I think when I get into specific curricular areas you'll see why, but Voc Ed sections are high costs, and so they are certainly in play as far as something that gets cut. We cut evening sections at a much greater rate than day sections, which makes sense because when you look at the labor force that gets laid off, it is mostly adjunct faculty who tend to teach evening sections at a greater rate than day sections, which also tends to play out into, okay, if we've lost a bunch of evening sections, then older students do not have access to the campus, which rolls right back into your age distribution changes. There was only one type of section that actually gained in all of this. Even though we cut sections at 6.4%, distance ed sections statewide gained 3.2%. So that area is something that colleges are turning to more and more to try and allow access to the system, because a student can access distance ed section at any time. Okay. Next section here, starting on page 7. Full-time equivalent students, which is our workload metric and what we get paid on. So during this period of time, cutting all the course sections, credit FTES still went up. So we cut course section 6.4%, and our FTES went up 2.3% in credit and 1.3% total. It went down in non-credit. That's certainly a much smaller piece. If you look at what happens now, call this round 1, okay? What's going on in spring and summer is really round 2 of cuts as colleges try and get within their caps within this year. And now the schedules for fall coming up are beginning to be made, and that's going to be round 3. Because then, you know, unless there is something in the budget that says there's going to be a decent amount of growth here, colleges are still going to have to get under cap. Looking at our top 10 curricular disciplines and what happened to them during this time, most of them still went up. Math is our #1 curricular discipline as far as FTES, and math went up 4.8%. English went up 1.1%. Number 3 is PE, and during this period of time, PE went up 4.2%. And hold that thought, because we're going to talk about this, because this one was a little surprising. The rest of these that still went up are mostly large, transferable majors, things like that. Biology went down. Biology is a nursing prerequisite, and nursing unfortunately went down. And Spanish, a foreign language. Many other foreign languages also went down. On the next page here, here are the curricular areas that were decreased the most, FTES-wise.
Wow.
So on the top and the bottom, you have Police Academy and Fire Academy, okay? Both programs got cut pretty much. Police Academy got cut a lot. And Jose and I, we've talked about this, what happened here. Well, I know in my city, they're cutting police left and right. Unfortunately, they're getting laid off. Firemen to a certain extent too. So the need for training of folks in Police Academy is probably not as much when municipalities across the state are generally laying off policemen. Nursing, LVN, and RN is also in there. And anecdotally, we also hear that the employee-employer glut is not nearly as much. This is also a high-cost program, so some of that has gone down. Career guidance and orientation and academic guidance, those are down. That's what happens when your matric budgets get cut. You don't do a lot of career guidance. 3 foreign languages on here, Japanese, French, and Spanish, also down. Computer programming, computer information systems, and especially real estate, not hot job prospects so much. Computer somewhat, probably not a great time to get into real estate. Biology and microbiology are nursing prerequisites, so if nursing is going down, those are also probably going down. And then you have a smattering of other, primarily voc programs that are going down, FTES-wise. So that's what's going on in the curriculum. Looking at PE specifically, because when PE popped up as increasing, I know the chancellor and I in cabinet got together and said, okay, we really need to drill down on this, what's going on here. So we looked at the total number of sections that were put on in PE. Did this drop? Did colleges really make this a priority in their system? The answer really is no. In summer, colleges cut PE by 18% as far as the number of course sections put on. But 18% drop in the number of course sections only resulted in a 4.3% drop in FTES.
Wow.
In fall, they cut PE 7.6%, and FTES actually went up 6.6% in PE. So we really started drilling down what happened there. And we did some surveys and got some answers back from the field. And anecdotally, it kind of goes like this. When a student comes in and they have to either fill out their dance card to stay on financial aid, or get enrollment priority for the next term, or even just gain access to the system, one of the last remaining courses left on the board to get is a PE course, which generally can be 30, 40, 50 students sometimes. And so therefore, the PE course fill rate went very, very up, okay? It's basically students jamming and wedging themselves into any possible remaining section they can. So it wasn't that we didn't cut the courses, it was just that that was one of the overflow areas that colleges could offer. Okay, any questions about this? I gave you highlights. There's certainly a lot more detail there, but before we get into transfer, any comments about this? I'm going to invite Dr. Van Omeren up and ask us to hand out the other handout if we could.
I don't see any questions. Oh, Chancellor Scott.
On this ethnicity one where they unknown declined to state, is there any way we could proportion that 18.1% out? Or you just think you can't get it, just be guess, huh?
The only way you could...
In other words, if you were to say, well, probably a third of those are Latino, a third of are white, or you just can't
Can't do it statistically.
can't do anything like that, huh?
No, not really.
Okay.
You could do a distribution of only those that responded.
Oh, I see what you mean. Then you could
Right.
take that 18% out and then get
But-
those percentages of those that responded.
But even then, you're assuming that those that don't respond are in the same proportion at those that do, and it's just not kosher.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm just saying, I'm not so sure, for instance, that we had a smaller percentage of Hispanic students and a smaller percentage of black students and a smaller percentage of white students.
I completely agree. There's no way that's possible.
No way that's possible. So but we don't know how they'd break out. But we're not, in other words, we couldn't look at this chart and assume, we're losing any ethnicity. It's because they're much more inclined now to list themselves as, if I consider myself of a mixed race, for instance, what do I do? Just go unknown?
No.
Nope.
You do too.
You essentially can check any and all boxes that you wish to affiliate with.
But then do you count those as one?
Nope, we count them as, see the row on there where it says more than one race? That's where they are counted.
Where is that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I see.
That is essentially the new category.
1%. But the big category is unknown. That's the one that throws you off, that rather than listing themselves as multiracial,
Correct.
which 1% did, maybe they said, I'm white and I'm black. My mother is white, my father is black, or something like that. They just, a lot of them checked unknown.
No, they're not allowed to check unknown. Unknown is not a
Declined to
checkbox.
state.
They just don't bother answering the question.
Yeah,
they
there's
don't
no
answer.
place for 'em, could it?
And, obviously, we cannot make enrollment contingent upon answering that question.
Because there's no spot for them to check.
Okay, I'm sorry, were you finished?
No, I'm through.
Member McDougal and Member Davis Lyman.
Yeah, I appreciate the report. I'm trying to take away a summary set of meaning from it. The three understandings that I have in terms of the most negative appears to be the impact on the nursing program. The most positive seems to be that transfer courses were not adversely affected. The second most positive is that physical education had a significant increase in productivity. Other than those three conclusions, I would be interested in your conclusions regarding the meaning of this.
Okay. I think it's round one, and that over the course of the next 2 years, we're going to add a whole lot more data points to this. From what I'm seeing so far, it's not a whole lot different than what happened in '93 and '02. We're going to cut course sections. It's going to affect certain parts of the curriculum and not others, as you've stated. It's going to shut out first-time students and students with low enrollment priority, and they may not ever come back. Okay, that one's kind of scary because it's a generational thing. You're just so unlucky to get out of high school at a time when we're rationing. You're faced with this life choice. Can I go to college or something else? Well, now I can't go to college.
What
And
in
do
this
they ever come
report
back?
allows you to draw that conclusion that we're shutting out more first-time students?
It's the loss, it's student enrollment status on page 4. Top line, top row on that.
First time?
Top 2 rows. First time and also the returning student who was here once.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah. Those are, we're talking a system of almost 3 million students. You drop 2 percentage points in anything in a year, and it's significant.
Okay.
And I think it's the most frightening thing. That's what,
That's really, I missed
to
that.
imagine,
Who won't come back?
can you imagine when all of us graduated from high school, if we went off to college and couldn't get in?
Right?
No.
Well,
We got in.
I would
couldn't get our
question, though,
classes.
it's not so much those students aren't getting in. Those students are choosing other sources of education. They're going to universities of Phoenix. I would think
They
they
could
are.
be.
Because they're
Very
very
true.
proactively recruiting our students, and they're giving them grants. They're giving them
Oh, not
scholarships to
getting into
attend.
community college.
I have to say that's not the reason, because our trend, and I know Eric Skinner did this, our trend of first-time students was going like this, and then all of a sudden this year it went like this. And we heard over and over again about literally hundreds of students at each campus that walked up or called and couldn't get a single class. And that I think is, it's hard to interview students who aren't on campus. They're not even there. But the trend that we saw was that our first-time students in the last 3 or 4 years has been going up steadily. Is that not correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And then all of a sudden this year, it went down sharply. It's got to be that I believe the demand was still there. but the supply wasn't there.
Right.
We didn't have the classes.
You're absolutely right, Chancellor, and we saw at the CPEC board meeting that the private universities are picking up those students. So it's not that they're not getting educated, I mean, some of them may not, but a lot of them are going to private universities that are actively recruiting those students. So you're right, the demand is still there, we're just not able to supply.
Yeah,
To
it
those
would
students.
be nice to think they are going somewhere. I'm fearful that they're not going anywhere.
Some aren't.
I mean, you know, and even though I'm not a great fan of the for-profit institutions, I'd rather see somebody enrolled than not even enrolled, because all the indications are that if people drop out of college or don't go, they're less likely to come back. I mean, you know, the kid that says, I'm going to lay out a year and go work, they're much more likely not to ever come back than the one that just continues through for the 4 years.
Member Davis Lyman and Member Baca.
Two things I'd like to respond to what the chancellor was saying. All you needed to do was to be on a campus last August or last January to see that there are students wandering the halls, first-time students, first-generation students, knocking on doors, trying to get any class, whether the class was appropriate or not. And they may have been granted financial aid, but they cannot put together a package to stay in school. It's not only sad, it's a disgrace. And whatever we can do to prevent that from continuing, this same line, percentage to continue, I know this board feels strongly about that, and that we need to grab onto that in some form and way. I just wanted to talk about something on page 9 where it says anecdotally what occurred to the PE. Another thing that might be added there is that PE is an integral part of a GE program, and that is one reason I'd like to see that added to one of the, because what we're doing, we're guessing at this, is that a lot of students are taking the GE requirement, and many times and that's part of it, because it's part of a program, it's part of a degree sequence, so,
Okay.
thank you.
Member Baca.
On the offerings in the police academy area, over time, have you seen that kind of go up and down quite a bit, or is it just that it was kind of level and then suddenly you get this dramatic increase, or is it an up and down thing over, let's say, 10, 15 years or something?
I don't have that offhand. Is Jose around?
No, he stepped out.
I could get it for you. My guess is it's probably a little more volatile because it's a little more reactionary to employment market specific, very specific area. But I could look it up.
And then maybe I could have another question once you
Sure.
give me that.
No, good. Okay. Okay.
Okay, I don't see any more questions or comments. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Skinner.
Oh, I'm
Eric.
sorry.
If I could just add one comment about the nursing.
Just to provide a little context on the nursing the reduction in FTS and nursing, there was a targeted cut in the state budget because nursing is one of our most expensive programs. The state has provided some additional categorical money to support those additional offerings. Well, that specific line item in the state budget was cut by about a third. And so what you're seeing in this significant reduction in nursing is, in large part, districts responding to that cut in direct funding, as opposed to, say, a shifting of priorities at the local level. It's really a reaction to a cut implemented by state leaders. So.
Such as the biology, right?
And then all the prerequisites with nursing, obviously, would definitely fall out from that as well. But just wanted to share that interaction.
Thanks. Okay, we're still good?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce Dr. Alice Van Omeren, who at our last board meeting, I can't remember who, but we talked about transfers and specifically to the for-profit segment. We're not going to talk about all transfers, but we're responding to a request to delve more into the ever-increasing number of transfers from our segment to the for-profits. Alice has done her dissertation on that specific topic, so we are in luck, and I'll turn it over to Alice.
Thank you.
Yes, at the last meeting, Vice Chancellor Perry talked about the accountability recruiting for the community colleges. And one of the metrics in that system-wide metrics is the volume of students that transfer to each of the sectors. So of the 100,000 students, we know which ones go into each sector. And we've been able to break down a little bit further as far as what percentage, what proportion are going to the for-profit sector, to the nonprofit sector, and to CSU and UC. And so we've kind of looked at this over a period of time, and it looks like over the past 10 years or so, it has doubled. In 97, 98, we had about 6% of our students that were transferring were going to the for-profit sector, and now it looks like 10 years later, it looks like it's 13%. So it has doubled. And then the chart in the table, or the table that you see there, it looks like that proportion is kind of taken from the CSU section there. So just a little background of why would we want to, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about the for-profit sector. What are the reasons why we want to look into this for-profit transfer pathway? They're the fastest growing sector as far as number of students and numbers of institutions nationally. So and then based on our trends analysis, our students seem to be choosing that sector as an option. Just a little bit historically, California Master Plan developed in 1960. They emphasized that community colleges, there was a real importance that transfer was a strong component, especially for economically and academically disadvantaged students. So the community colleges were here, a system created to provide opportunities for a four-year degree into the four-year sector. Of course, at that time, 1960s, the for-profit sector wasn't into the higher education yet. So things have changed over time. So I think it's important as a system that we kind of need to pay attention to this trend towards for-profit sector. A little bit of background about the development of for-profits, since I did my dissertation on it. I've got a lot of information on it. They've been around since the 1800s. Historically, they've been for-profits business schools. So they were a very large sector, but they were very distinct, so mostly business type of schools. And then in the 1900s, they became more focused on vocational education. So still two-year institutions, but very focused on vocational. Still a separate sector. After World War II, the GI Bill allowed for-profits to benefit from federal subsidies, so they became a little bit more involved in federal tapping of the federal money. 1972, they officially became part of higher education, so for-profits were able to call themselves higher education institutions in 1972. 1990 or so, several of these for-profit institutions became publicly traded companies, and DeVry and University of Phoenix are two prime examples during the 90s. The most important thing was in 1998, the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act allowed for-profits to benefit from Title IV student financial aid support. So for-profit students going to for-profit institutions after 1998 were able to get federal grants and federal loans. And so that was kind of a great opportunity for students to tap into that. A little bit about for-profits also have regional and national accreditation. That allows them students to receive federal financial aid. The regional accreditation is a little bit more important than the national accreditation because it provides the ability for students to transfer their units from one institution to another. And also, regional accreditation kind of sets other for-profits apart from each other. So now they're regionally accredited. Now they're part of the public education or the traditional system. So it's kind of a prestige part of it as well. And you're hearing a lot of news in the media lately about for-profit institutions buying nonprofit institutions. And one of the reasons is because the regional accreditation comes that nonprofits have, they automatically, well, not automatically, but they buy into that basically. So the regional accreditation is pretty critical for for-profits to play into the new sector. First for-profit to be accredited was by the North Central Association, was University of Phoenix in 1978. All the 8 commissions are pretty similar as far as the accreditation process, but North Central seems to mostly accredit non-traditional academic models. So most of them go through North Central to get accredited. little bit about University of Phoenix. They were developed in the 70s as currently the largest of the for-profit institutions. They're international. They now offer doctoral programs. Their success, as many for-profits are, is really in distance education, their ability to use online education to reach a large amount of number of students, and their ability to quickly adapt to the changes in the employment sector. So they can really change their curriculum really quickly to if there's any market changes, as opposed to traditional institutions where changing the curriculum takes a little bit longer. And for-profits have really taken that as an advantage. They're also very student-centered approach, strong support services during the admission process, the financial aid process. They continue to provide support throughout their academic career. Because they're so very student-oriented, or more student-oriented, they're holding classes at convenient times, convenient locations. A lot of times they offer one class at a time. And so that seems to work well for a lot of students. And when we looked at all our students transferring to for-profit, it looks like 70 to 75% go to University of Phoenix. So they really are the big player here. Other for-profits, DeVry, ITT, Ashford, Argosy, Capella. National University is not a for-profit, it's actually a non-profit, as well as Drexel. And there's a lot of times people confuse the for-profit with the non-profit, but there are differences between the two. Looked a little bit about just kind of further as far as what's happening with University of Phoenix. And if you look at this table here, students going to Phoenix 10 years ago was about 2,000, 3,000 students, and now it's up to about 9,000 students, 9 to 10,000 students. So as far as volume, they've increased. But they're also, if you look at the last column, the proportion has really increased as well, as far as the percentage from the private sector. It used to be 30% of the privates were University of Phoenix students transferring, and now that's almost increased to 43, 44%. So they continue to be big players, and they continue to grow.
I'm sorry, what's the students to privates? What is that?
It includes both nonprofits and for-profit institutions. Transfers, we're all talking about transfer students. So
And by
basically,
nonprofits, you're talking about national and not like Stanford or USC?
includes Stanford, includes USC, yes. So
right.
all the private institutions.
Okay.
Traditionally, for-profits have always served ethnically diverse students. They've always been be able to do that. But University of Phoenix continues to receive a higher proportion of African American transfers from our system than the other sectors. And if you look at that table with the percentages of African American students going to Phoenix is 15.6%. Compared to the other sectors where it's 5, 6, 7% or so. And if you, for example, another way of look at the ethnicity is if you look at University of California in the last column, a large proportion of Asian students go to the UC system. So this is an example of how for-profit institutions continue to serve not only ethnically diverse students, but also taking our transfer students that are ethnically diverse. A little bit about comparing for-profits with traditional institutions. Organizational structure and sources of funding is different for for-profits. Public institutions mostly rely on state and local funding, so public funding. Nonprofits mostly do fundraising and have favorable tax benefits. They're tax exempt in a lot of course they also have tuition, but mostly fundraising and endowments. For-profits, mostly tuition, tax benefits associated with businesses. Because of their different structure of funding, they also operate very differently. For-profits are businesses. They're structured and managed to meet expectations of shareholders through efficiency and growth. So they run their schools as businesses because they are businesses. No sports, no art, no research, no dorms, no fraternities. Very efficient as far as the structures, the buildings, the classrooms. Really take a business approach. Faculty is the biggest difference at public and nonprofits. Faculty are part at our traditional types of institutions. faculty are part of the decision-making process. So the shared governance play at public institutions as well as nonprofit institutions. At for-profit, management makes many of the curriculum decisions. Faculty is primarily part-time. And the reason for that is because they really have faculty that come out of the employment sector. A lot of times they are still working in the field. They have the experience, and so faculty really doesn't have as much as part of the decision-making process as the traditional institutions. I also put a little table in there, and this comes out of a book that, and I'll give you 3 resources here at the end, which talks a little bit about the differences between nonprofits and for-profits. If you go down, nonprofits are very more prestigious, their motive is more for prestige. For-profits are more profit-oriented. Nonprofits are more discipline-driven, and for-profits are more market-driven. So a lot of times, like sociology, psychology, those types of disciplines, you'll see those less in for-profit institutions. They're more health-oriented, business-oriented, those type of the needs to the market. For-profits tend to be less selective. They also accept most transfer units, so there's no need for articulation agreements. There's limited accountability and research pertaining to the for-profit sector. Again, for-profit sectors, because they don't get any public funding, they're not accountable to the public. They're still accountable to accreditation. They go through exactly the same process as the public sector does. And they have to do financial reports because they're a business. But there's no accountability reports that we're familiar with. Yes?
But the students get public funding? Students get loans, student loans?
Yes, yes.
And is that going to be part of this, the difference in end cost per student or yearly cost? Because I think that's a really critical part to this report.
Right.
The thousands of dollars that students pay to go to for-profit as a comparison. If we're going to be looking at the whole thing, I'd like to see that also.
Okay. Yeah, there's been some cost estimates as far as between each of the sectors, you know, how much is a for-profit versus a nonprofit versus, and but I mean, I don't have that in this report here.
But I think it would be a critical thing for us to hear.
Yeah, they're getting
what it costs a student to get out of a for-profit, out of a community college, out of a CSU, a UC.
Right, and that's going to come up in a minute too, as when we look at what type of students are going to our
student loans.
Right.
They are getting a disproportionate amount of aid.
Because indirectly, they do benefit from public funding.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
Quite directly, not indirectly, quite
Right.
directly. Yeah.
Right. So because these institutions are different, it seems that as a community college system, and we are transferring students there, that we kind of have to pay attention to that. So what we did, or what I did, is kind of looked at all our community college students. Are there any differences between the students that are going to for-profits versus the ones that are going to non-traditional institutions? So we kind of did a comparison. They tend to be students in our system that have less units. So we compared for 40, on the average, about 42 units in our system versus transfers that are about 79 units in our system that go to CSU. So there's a difference between the two. They're taking less units in our system. They tend to take a little bit longer in our, as far as years. So they spend a little bit more time in our system as far as time. In comparing the students' characteristics of transfers to for-profits versus all other transfers, we did some logistic regression modeling, and academic experiences are still the most predictive of transfers to for-profits. So when we looked at students that go to for-profits versus other types of institutions, academics seems to play a large role. And that includes GPA, that includes part-time status, that includes the units that I just talked about, as well as the years.
Excuse me. When you say GPA, do they normally have a higher or a lower GPA?
Yeah, lower GPA.
Okay. I didn't know which one it was.
Taking into account all these student characteristics that we have available in our system, the odds of transferring to a for-profit increases by 21% for females. So taking into account same GPA, same type of units, all those variables at the same time, females are more likely to go to for-profits than to traditional institutions, which include CSU, UC, and nonprofits. For African Americans, the odds increased by 35%. For Hispanics, 17%. Older students, 24%. And for those receiving financial aid, 37%. Back to so students that are receiving financial aid, and I put an asterisk next to it because it's a little bit of a weak variable in our system. It's not very reliable, it's not always valid, so there's a caution to that. And so we need to dig into that a little bit further. But you know, it seems like there's students that are on financial aid are choosing for-profit institutions increasingly. Taking into account all available student characteristics, the odds of transferring to a for-profit decreases by 10% for every increase in GPA. So, so if their GPA increases by 0.10, they're 10% less likely to go to a for-profit. 3.3% for each additional unit earned, we talked about that. If they use a transfer center, their odds also decrease by 25%. And if they declare transfer as a goal, it also decreases by about 10%. Again, I put asterisks next to those because those variables are not totally reliable in our system for a variety of reasons. We looked a little bit at the 110 community colleges and looked is there anything about community colleges that are there community colleges that are transferring more students to for-profits? And there are. We looked at some of the characteristics. The community colleges that are serving students that are living in lower educational areas and colleges serving a higher proportion of female students have a higher proportion of transfers to for-profits. So low-income areas, higher proportion of female students at the college, you know, and a higher increase of for-profit transfers for those community colleges. Conclusion, community college students that transfer to for-profits are different from students that follow traditional routes. So there is a difference between the students that choose for-profits versus the traditional ones. Academic experiences is very influential, but holding all those academic experiences constant, African American older and female students are increasingly going to for-profits. Preliminary results indicate that transfers who receive financial aid, do not use the transfer center, and don't have a transfer goal are more likely to enroll at nonprofits. So again, it looks like there's some indication that those are students that are going to for-profits. Research often creates more questions than answers. Are these students finding new opportunities? In other words, are these students that never really had an intent of going to a four-year institution, and they're finding opportunities at for-profit institutions? Or are they running into experiencing barriers? Are they finding that it's hard to get into the traditional institutions, and are they choosing for-profits? We don't know because we don't necessarily know what the reasons are. We don't have access to that information. So as a system, what are the implications of students going to for-profits? So as a system, because we are creating these transfer opportunities, we don't know what the educational outcomes are of those students going to for-profits. What are their employment opportunities? What's their financial liability, as you mentioned? And how does this compare to similar students choosing traditional pathways? Assuming this trend of transfers to for-profit increases over time, what are the system and policy implications? What do we do about articulation? What do we do about accountability? And then just the last part, I just talked a little bit, there's 3 books that are pretty interesting as far as if you want to learn more about for-profits that are interesting to read. So I just left those there as a resource.
Well, thank you for that information. Are there any comments or questions? Member McDougall and Member Baca.
Just a question on page 1. Would you have the N for the total N for 97, 98, and 07, 08? Because if you look at the N for the for-profit, for example, you had indicated that there were 11,000 going in 97, 98, which represented 6%, then almost 22,000 in 07, 08, and where there's a little more than a doubling. So one would assume, without the N, total N being available, that there are just as many students going to CSU and you, or close to it, and you see in '07, '08, as we're going in '90s, it's just that the percentage of them has changed because your N is so much greater.
Yeah, I mean, the ends have all increased for all of them, pretty much.
Well, I understand that, but knowing the total N would allow you to look at absolute numbers for the system.
Correct.
And not
Yes.
having that does not allow that. Because if the state, for example, is not supporting growth in CSU and UC, it's going to affect our students in their ability to transfer.
Correct,
Because they're not expanding the transfer opportunity.
right.
And so that's very important from a public policy standpoint.
Correct.
So if at some stage you can get the N, I'd just be curious about it for that reason.
Right, okay, yeah. They are actually, they're in the ARC report, but I can get them for you as well.
Member Baca?
I know you don't have any data on this likely, but just your thoughts. One is the CSU has been increasing in tuition over some period of time, and just be curious how much that might be a factor in terms of just deciding to go to a private institution where the fees have been getting closer and closer. The other thing is in terms of debt. I mean, much financial aid, but it would be worth a look to see how much debt these students and the population in particular that you identified as seeking transfer to private is in areas where the debt might be quite significant.
Right.
And so, you know.
And the media has picked up on that a little bit, and there's been several articles, and there was a frontline special on it, where they really focused on the concern of just the debt that the students are getting into. And
What are your thoughts along, just in terms of your study? And
well, it's I mean, there's one thing about debt, but then there's also there's one. If you take it one step further, is there employment opportunities? Right. I mean, it's so if they are really going into getting great careers in healthcare and business, and they are able to pay those loans back, then you know that's a trade-off. We don't know. We don't know what happens if they graduate with the degrees. We don't know what kind of debt. We don't know what kind of employment opportunities. Of course, we don't know that about the traditional sector that much either. So I don't know. I mean, they're definitely concerned about that, especially if lower income students are choosing that route, and that financial aid variable, and minority students and lower GPA students. That's definitely an area of concern.
well, thank you. You've given us a lot to think about here.
I'm going to have Member Baca speak, and then we're going to end this discussion because we do have some members of the public who would like to address us also.
No, my just hope is, I appreciate, this is very helpful knowledge. It's what do we do as a Board of Governors, as a system, with this knowledge? We see that the trend's growing in a specific direction, and rather than, we all have a lot of concerns about the for-profit segment, but that's not under our control. What is under control is what from the for-profit section and these trends indicate why are our students going to them? What can we be doing within our system? So as I look at this table where it says for-profit, non-profit, are we focused enough on the quality of outcomes for our students? You know, we do a lot on, I know Jane's out there about student learning outcomes, and are we doing a good enough job in focusing on the quality of outcomes that is then translated to those students who will then see, or are we driving students to the for-profit segment because of the lack of access? But is there something about the way we're structured that certain students, African-American students, are turning to them in growing numbers? Still a minority, but I'm hoping this provides an opportunity for us as a board or as a system to then say, what can we apply here as well?
Okay, thank you.
And so how do we take this information? What do we do with it?
Our next step.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you very much for your report.
Thank you.
Lots of
very much.
information. Thank you.
Excellent.
And I'll turn it over to the Vice President.
Okay, we have three speakers. First up is Cecilia Simpson, representing CSEA.
of Governors. I just came to say hello. It's interesting to see you do your business. My home district is Copper Mountain College out in Joshua Tree, where Chancellor Scott did help our foundation raise some money for the Osher fund. So I'd just like to say it's been a privilege to be here today, and we look forward to seeing how you solve the problems. I am excited about the meeting tomorrow, however, I cannot attend. My home district did have a meeting one time with our neighboring K-12 district once. We called it the Battle of the Boards. So it's nice to hear that these two boards will not be battling. But the one thing that we did find out way out there in Joshua Tree is the fact that our K-12 wasn't really selling the community college. They were selling higher education, but just the whole package, and they didn't really gear towards community college. But now I think a little bit of that is changing through the ADVID program. I'm not sure if some of you have heard about that. That kind of gears the kids that need that push into community colleges. So good luck tomorrow, and thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you. Marcia Zablikas, trustee from Barstow Community College.
Hi, it's good to see you. I'm also a Triple CT board member, but what I want to talk to you about really fits very nicely into what was talked about before. I come from a small rural college, and we are located about 150 miles round trip to the nearest CSU. That is, and we're a low income, which was what you were talking about before. We are located probably another 20 miles from the newest UC. The only options we have in our community for most of our people are Barstow College. And from then on, what we have, the people that are willing to work with us are the the for-profits. And they're willing to do that through online. And one of the reasons they take more classes in our area from Barstow College is because they'll take more classes that will benefit the students. They'll accept more classes from the community college. What I want just to mention, and I know it's this isn't currently being discussed in the Senate or the Assembly, is that a college located where we are would benefit greatly with a baccalaureate program. I realize that's not something that most people are interested in, but we're talking about low-income people that don't have transportation to get anywhere. We're talking about people that desperately need this education, and we can't give it to them. So when the time comes for you to rethink or to even talk about again the baccalaureate program, what I hope you consider is someone in a college that's in a remote area, an area doesn't have options, and perhaps the only options we have, if they can get the money from it, are the for-profits. And that's only because if they can stand the online classes. So that's what I wanted to talk about. It's a real concern from my community, and we would really love you to consider it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Nahasi Lee, student from Compton Community Education Center.
You can imagine what they go through down there, don't you? My intention at this point in your agenda was to talk to you about your visit to El Camino, but we took that up when Chancellor Scott was talking about the accreditation issue. I was going to say something about when you see me, when I put on this jacket, I only wear this jacket in community college settings. Everything on this jacket occurred because of my participation in statewide student leadership or leadership at my campus. So I'm an avid and ardent proponent of student leadership and the opportunities that are availed at the state level. Tomorrow you're going to have on your agenda outgoing President Reed Milborn of the Student Senate, And you can ask her questions relative to the comments I made in regards to funding and stuff like that. But I looked on your blue board out there, and I'm gonna take 6 words. I'm gonna leave out California community colleges. There are 9 words on the board, and those 6 words are empowering through leadership, advocacy, and support. And if you look at that budget I showed you, those zeros indicate no support. I indicated that when I served in student leadership at the state level, there was $100,000 that students knew that they had available to go and participate on statewide committees. I participated on a statewide committee, telecommunication and teleconferencing, in which $253 million had been provided to the system. And I walked into a meeting, and the 3 other advocacy groups or constituency groups were talking about eliminating students' access to email. They said, well, students can go get Hotmail accounts and Yahoo accounts and all that kind of stuff. And the only reason was that the administrator of the computer system, they didn't want to take the time to reconfigure repartition the system to include, they had partitions for administrative faculty and staff. They didn't want to partition it for students. So sometimes I get idiot, you know, I could use a Socratic method, but that's not my way. I said, well, okay, if students can go get Hotmail accounts, then why don't we just all go get Hotmail accounts? And they've smartened up and wised up, and I said, because your access to the accounts are because of students enrolled on these campuses. And they wisened up and said, well, okay, then now all students have access to email accounts. When I pull out a figure, when I take $26 times just one enrollment dollar and suggest, there's no way that I can sit here and understand how students don't have the resources necessary to participate in shared governance, and it's mandated throughout the state. So I would appreciate it if you'd look into that and assist the chancellor and whatever entities that are available to get the students the necessary resources to participate in shared governance. And I certainly look forward to seeing you at either El Camino campus, I'll be at that one, or Compton's campus. And it's been a pleasure being here with you today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. That concludes our public comments. And I'll just mention our meeting starts tomorrow at 8:30.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Just to follow up on Jeffrey's comments, I think it is important that we revisit the presentation that was given to us, and we take away from that what are the important things that we need to focus our efforts on. One, to be competitive for our students, to be able to offer the services that they need, opposed to them having to go to the for-profits. And secondly, to make sure that we are student-focused and we're servicing their needs. So I would ask for some time on a future agenda, if not tomorrow, for us to come back and visit that.
Okay, thank you. I'll think about that. When's the good time to do it? Okay, we are adjourned until tomorrow morning at 8:30.